obviously the reason for this meeting, it was called on short order because of a couple of incidents that had happened last week here in the neighborhood. One specifically on Post Road and a second one happening a short time later on Leopold Way. They were both firearms related incidents in which firearms were either shot at someone or at something, and it was important for us to sit down, in my opinion, with the neighborhood to have a conversation about those incidents to the extent that we can have a conversation about them, since they are open and active investigations. And then I also felt it would be helpful for us to share information with you about the things that we have done in the last week or so after learning of these incidents here in this neighborhood, but also having a couple of incidents in a different neighborhood here in Fitchburg. I also want to share information on what we plan to do moving forward, and then more importantly, the reason for the meeting is to engage in a dialogue with all of you to find out what is happening in your neighborhood from your perspective, and how we may be able to assist you in addressing some of the issues that you might be seeing in the neighborhood. But the two incidents for this particular meeting that we wanted to focus on happened on July 12th, both around 10 o'clock in the evening. The first one happened at 2501 Post Road. There was a male victim who was 29 years old who was exiting a vehicle after just returning home, and upon him exiting the car, he immediately heard some shots being fired. Unfortunately, he was struck twice by shots that had been fired. He sustained some non-life-threatening injuries, thankfully non-life-threatening injuries, and they weren't more severe. He was transported to a local hospital where he received treatment for those gunshot wounds, and additionally there was a vehicle that had been struck by gunfire as well during that incident. And about 10 minutes after that incident, as our staff was responding to this incident, we received a report of shots having been fired at 3313 Leopold Way, apartment number 6. That apartment actually had several rounds fired at it, several rounds struck that apartment. It was also occupied at the time of the shots being fired towards its direction. So by some stroke of luck, probably, we're fortunate that we didn't have someone else also having gunshot wounds that evening. Anytime someone or something, a building or home is shot at and it's occupied, it's clearly going to be a concern and a recipe for disaster. Preliminarily, it appears that those two incidents are related. For whatever reason, someone is targeting both the individual at 2501 and that apartment on Leopold Way. Our investigators who have been assigned to the case are following up on leads on both of those situations, and at this point in time, early indications are that those two situations have connections to them. And hopefully as we continue to investigate those two incidents, we'll be able to piece everything together and definitively make the connection between the two of them, and obviously ultimately hold people responsible for those activities. Again, neither of these situations appear to be random acts of violence. Both the person who was shot at Post Road and the apartment appear to have specifically been targeted. And again, we're trying to determine what the motive is for that particular situations. So clearly, these situations are cause for great concern to not only me, but all members of the Fitchburg Police Department and members of city government as well. Both elected officials and employees of city government. And I'm guessing that by the turnout of you folks here tonight, you're also very concerned about what happened in this neighborhood last week as well. Due to the incidents that happened, we immediately began to look at some things that we needed to take a look at and potentially look to do as far as action steps to be taken. That began last week early when we had a couple of incidents over in the Thurston Lane area of Allied Dunn's Marsh neighborhood. And then clearly some additional work was necessary and action steps were necessary after we had the two incidents on Thursday night here in your neighborhood. So obviously one of the first and foremost things that we always try to do when we have any sort of significant criminal activity taking place in a neighborhood is we do what we can to increase our visibility based upon the resources that we currently have available and the call volume that's taking place. In this particular case, we also met with the management of the Fairways apartment complex on Friday already, the day following the incidents. We wanted to talk obviously about the incidents that had occurred at the Fairways apartment complex, but also discuss other police-related matters with apartment management while we had their attention. It is important to note that we had already begun a deeper dive into the calls for service at the Fairways apartments prior to these incidents. We had noticed an uptick in calls from 2016 to 2017, so we had been looking to see where that increase was coming from and if there was any sorts of correlations that we could draw from that increase. We have a district officer who is assigned as a liaison with the Fairways apartment complex, and that officer had been meeting with the on-site management on a regular basis to share police call information, share areas where we may be seeing concerns with repeated calls to certain apartments or dealing with certain individuals, all in an effort to try to be proactive and reduce the potential for any sorts of continued calls for service at the property.